Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
We're going to be talking about the Tabularium archive today and some of the publications in there. And it's going to be recorded and posted on the website afterwards. So please share it with whoever's not here. So, just so you know, I want to keep this really formal. I want to contribute.
Milana, the voice is going in and out.
It's going in and out?
Yeah.
It might come a bit closer, just so you can see. But just let me know if you can't hear anything that I say. Yeah?
That's better.
Okay, yeah, okay. Okay, joining us today in Melbourne, we've got Sarah and Michelle and Ross as well, no? Ross isn't here, but Sarah and Michelle from Polar Space. We've also got Holly Charles as well. And joining us on Google Hangout, we have Amy from London.
Hello.
Ben, who is also from London. We've got Zara Blomfield from Berlin. And we've got Karen Ann Donaki from Perth. And Marion Tubbs from Sydney. But before I thought I'd kind of talk through all your bios and stuff, I just wanted to share with you a bit about a few sentences from the exhibition essay I've been writing on the exhibition about the archive, and hopefully it'll give you a bit more context for why I'm working on this project. So in this essay, which is called Returning to the Tabularium, an exhibition and archive in pursuit of chronological time, I discussed John Rathman's work, which is called Annals of Time Lost, and it's actually usually shown on this screen. And basically what I say is, what I think is pertinent in the context of this essay is the reference in my work's title to time that is lost. When one surfs the internet, the available content is experienced by the user in the present. Unless one specifically uses the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine or a similar digital archive to access content, the lack of ability to get an accurate snapshot of chronological time on the Internet is problematic. This is also an issue that's made apparent by Rye Vega Bradley's experiment, which you can see behind you. It's called Flowers from Ukraine. As the time or the length of time of the image of the flower is left on the Wikipedia page is now lost. And it's very much unlike the experience of reading a book, which has been left untouched for a number of years, as all physical books, I would say, are kind of products of a specific moment in chronological time. So one way I've tried to reclaim this sense of loss is through the building of this archive. So the idea is that it will act like a time capsule in the future. So Ben is a curator, writer, network analyst, technologist, and Luddite. Currently, he's the curator of digital at Serpentine Galleries. He co-runs Limazulu Project Space in London. He participates in the Near Now Fellowship Program and is an active member of the distributed think tank Edge Riders. In the present moment, he lives and worships between the ancient city of Matera, southern Italy, and London. He continues to facilitate the open source development of Unmonastery, a new civically minded social space based on contemporary monastic principles. And on his contribution to the Tabularium archive, and the publication is called AKA Live Journal version 1.0, I just thought, Ben, I'd read out the introduction you sent me, because I thought it was quite reflective of your thoughts on the text at this time. So what he wrote to me was as follows. In 2012, shortly after blowing my life up during the production of an augmented reality game, I moved to Prague for a couple of months to recover. I took with me a stack of books and all of my hard drives. Over the course of my stay, I attempted to make sense of the practice I'd been engaged in since around 2009, a kind of illegible blur, punctuated by artworks, relationships, and personal drama that acted as nodes in a network of a broader network, predicated on traceable network effects. I condensed the contents of my hard drives into a single 200+ page book, printing just 10 books. They were contained in opaque boxes at the exhibition Net Narrative in London, and each box had a profile photo for the friend or collaborator that they were intended. And you kind of ended your description by saying this was the last artwork I produced in public. And when I was flicking through the book in preparation for the talk, what I was really interested in was in the introduction, you have some kind of rules or caveats about how the book should be read. And also what, you kind of the rules or the boundaries you were setting on the book itself. And so one of them was that distribution was limited to 10 copies, and the digital version will never be put into circulation. So I wanted to, I guess, start off by asking you why limit distribution to such a small amount, and why not make a digital version? Especially, I think in the text you actually say that you plan to revise the book periodically and have multiple versions, but I'm not sure if you've gone down that path.
Yeah, okay. So, limited versions, I guess that... I might have to take my headphones off because I can hear feedback. I guess it's something that I feel quite vulnerable about, because one of the reasons I only produced 10 copies was because I guess it's a kind of honesty about like who the audience for the work actually is. And I think that through the production of work online, like obviously there was a time when I was producing a lot online, I felt like it was kind of dishonest to kind of pretend that there was this like global audience for an artwork that was predicated on personal relationships and building networks and community. So I wanted to just restrict it to 10 copies, and then I guess in terms of like the sort of investment that people put into work, I really fetishized this idea for a couple of years of like completely destroying like the aura around artwork and like the privileged space of the art object and stuff like that. And then I guess like producing the book was like going back on that and being like, I am actually really invested in like what art means and what it can do. And I thought that perhaps that was more effective if you just produced for a small audience of people who are already engaged and invested in the work that's being produced. So I guess that's why I didn't produce a digital copy. Also because like if you produce a book, it allows you to be much more honest. If there's only 10 of them, so like there's a lot of things, like I guess another example of that would be the book that you have in the archive, the catalogue for paraproduction. Like I wrote an essay in that there's no way I would want that published on the internet, because it would be kind of problematic because I say some things that and put some things into circulation that I don't want everybody to be aware of.
Just by way of context, I just want to explain to everyone here that the publication that Ben is mentioning, Paraproduction, it was an exhibition I worked on in Amsterdam, and I invited Ben to write a text for it. And it was very much a kind of a personal approach to an artwork, or your own personal experience, I think, to Ed Borniel's one of his works. Is that right?
Yeah. I think, yeah, maybe to build on that, maybe to say a little bit about how the Carlos Ishikawa exhibition functioned with that artwork. So in like 2010-ish, I have to give like the shorthand explanation. I mean, the book explains like some of it, but I created a company with a friend that was acting as like an anonymous corporation, and we actually made quite a lot of money in the first couple of months, and then it descended into this like fucked up artwork where curated a bunch of exhibitions that kind of collapsed in on themselves, and then liquidated the company. And the like final exhibition of that series of shows was the liquidation of that company, and probably like, I don't know, 20 or 30 people saw it in London, and then the documentation doesn't exist, and like some of the documentation's on that book, but like 2 years later when I produced that book, the guy who I'd started the company with oh shit, I forgot this is being recorded live, so suddenly all of this information, oh, I guess it doesn't matter. So the guy who I'd started that company with also like started a relationship with my girlfriend, which was like part of the reason why the company had to collapse within a series of exhibitions. But what I did when I put that book together is I wanted to demonstrate that like the work that I was producing at that time existed within this kind of network effect, and in order to prove that like network effect could be a performance, I publicly released an email that he sent to me where he was trying to sue me for something that existed within some documentation on some alt tags online. And so what happened at the exhibition is all these people turned up who were like friends with us or were my enemies or whatever, and they went through the boxes and like got the book out and would read it in the gallery during the private view. There was like 5 people sat on the floor reading the book, and then they put it back in the box and then they left. And this caused like an enormous amount of drama within like a particular network of friends. And it was, yeah, I mean, it was kind of about that. And I think that the kind of complexity of that kind of work can't really be achieved through just like posting an image online or anything like that. And I'm kind of interested in that layered effect and the way that the book acts as a provocation to a small group of people, but also this kind of compression format for a kind of history that would probably never be documented.
What do you think now about the fact that it's now part of an archive which is publicly accessible and, you know, is arguably not for that original network that you produced it for?
I guess I was thinking about that when I was watching Lawrence Leck's video. I think the only place that it could exist is an archive, and before I did this, I kind of wanted to be able to read back through the book, but for either somebody's stolen it from my room or I've lost it. I'm not sure what happened to my copy, but I think it makes sense for it to exist within an archive. I think there's probably content in it that is important, because if you look online now, a lot of the works that exist within that book, not just like personal history and stuff, but there's work that I produced with Sarah Hartnett under the heading of Sopping Granite, and it's like there's a total lack of awareness of the existence of that work, and there's so much stuff that's lost from around like 2007 to 2010 that's like referenced there. Like the book itself is even a reference to Chris Secoy's book on Brad Trammell as like a fake person, and it's a direct reference to what he produced for the Just Chillin' exhibition in New York in 2009. So I guess I appreciate the need to like store these things for posterity, in some sense.
Okay, I want to move on to someone in space now. Holly, oh, you're hiding. Do you want to come out so everyone can see you? So Holly is a writer, editor of Crazy in Love magazine, and an artist, and she makes work around digital semiotics, transformations of language and culture, aberration, and fashion. Her writing has been published in Australia and overseas, including in Going Down Swinging, Overland, Seizure, Fordyce Poetry Review, Brow, Endlessly Lonely Planet, Polar magazine. Next month she'll be doing a 3-month residency at Arcadia in London, and her debut novel No Limit was published by Hologram Books this year. And I'm also going to share around the 3 issues of Crazy in Love magazine that we have in the archive as well. So No Limit is Holly's first novella, and it follows a character called Ash, whose connecting flight out of Auckland has been grounded by a volcanic eruption on 21st of December 2012. And I guess there was a scene that I wanted to talk about with you in there, where Ash visits the gallery, named Yes Ultra, and there's an exhibition for Not Dream. I might just read out that little section there to give people a bit of context about what it is. So Ash is handed a room sheet with a quote by an American art critic saying that this show answers the question we've all been asking. Can an artist working in the visual realm break through to the mainstream? With the resounding answer at this point, not necessarily. Then there's descriptions of the works. There's a work by BPPR that's melted pirated DVDs and master cycle moulded into rings that have BPPR etched on them. A work by someone distantly involved with this magazine, something from a local experimental fashion collective called Pauline. A work by Amalia Ullman that is decals affixed to glass panels on a door propped sideways against a wall, including Volcom, Independent, Roxy, DC shoes, and these logos. The woman symbol and some stars, a crescent moon, and the zodiac symbol for Capricorn. A piece by Clara Chon that is a round deerskin fur bag studded with rivets forming a sad face next to a quote from Blair Waldorf that says, "Fashion is the most powerful art there is. It's movement, design, and architecture all in one. It shows the world who we are and who we'd like to be." And I thought it was interesting that in the acknowledgement section of the book, you actually name some of the artists and thank them for their works for your exhibition. I'm just wondering sort of how that process was going to actually work.
I was interested in presenting a fictional exhibition of real work by real artists. And I was kind of imagining what an exhibition that was exploring that kind of theme, like who would be in it. Because the book set in December 2012. I sort of was looking back at that era and thinking about who was being selected for our book project. So exploring kind of like online art stuff. And then I just spoke to the artists that I was interested in showing in the gallery in the book. And with each artist workshop, what work they would have or did produce in that era that they would like to go in the book. Yeah, so PVPR gave me a list of possible works that they would have produced in that era, and Amalia gave me a few links to like the work that she was making in that period and asked me to select.
And why present this kind of fictional exhibition in the book? How does it how does it relate to the rest of the book?
It's just a thing that happened in the book that is kind of within the realm of my reality. Like, I go to galleries all the time. So it makes sense that would be reflected in the book that I read. I didn't think of that. It doesn't seem very eloquent.
No, that's a perfectly good reason. I was just curious.
And yeah, I guess I'm interested in like art writing that it's not like secondary to the artwork. It's sort of like writes a work of being or like does something that is kind of not subjugated.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So with the kind of the fictional, non-fictional work, how does the artist feel about their work almost retaining some kind of immortality in some way that was very different maybe from these works 2 years ago?
Everyone seems just pretty like interested for their work to be depicted or shown in that context. Yeah, I didn't I only kind of got positive feedback
with the descriptions as well? Was that
Yeah.
from you, or did you workshop with them how you describe their work?
They gave me either ideas or images, and then from that I wrote what it looked like that like. Yeah.
So I might move on to just introducing Karen Ann. So together with Andy Simeonato, Karen Ann Donaki has contributed quite a few publications to the archive, so I'm just going to start sending them around now. So Karen Ann Donaki and Andy Simeonato are artist scholars in photography, design and art publishing. From 1990 through to 2010, they were based in Milan, Italy, where alongside their studio practice, they founded and curated the experimental art periodical This Is a Magazine in 2002, and later the imprint Atomic Activity books in 2008, from which a number of monographic artist books and compendia of internet art have been published. So Karen Ann's artistic activity overlaps fields as diverse as photography, video, performance, algorithmic and internet art. She has also she's exhibited in solo and group exhibitions in Argentina, Australia, Denmark, France, Germany, Italy, Luxembourg and the USA. And currently Karen Ann lectures on contemporary image at Curtin University in Perth, where she's a PhD by research candidate under an Australian Postgraduate Award and Curtin Research Scholarship. And her PhD research explores the selfie and the network self-portrait. So Karen, and I kind of wanted to start with discussing who I think I am.
Yep.
Which is the 5th compendium of This Is a Magazine. And the reason I wanted to mention this publication first, is because it's presently the earliest work in the archive.
Right.
And just by way of background for everyone here, it's described as containing over 200 pages of new works, almost all of which have been cut, sliced, diced, scored, folded, and generally messed with before being stitch bound into a hardcover with a giant laminated DIY paper sculpture as a dust jacket. It's a book which explores the fine print in the contracts of identity. The reader is invited to complete Who I Think I Am with over 100 stickers, a How to Artist Live survey card, fold and read chapters, and a bag of previously removed compendia parts. And what I found quite interesting on the This Is a Magazine website is you actually refer to it as being an internet-specific publication. So I was just hoping you can expand on that, given that, you know, we're holding.
Oh, you dropped out right at the end there. Okay. Yeah, This Is a Magazine started as an online publication. So we were back in 2002, and that's when, you know, you just had Flash as a platform. It was Flash 3, so it was really fun. Things didn't really work very well, and we just made a simple flip book. At the time, it was one of the first. Obviously, everyone scrambles to say they're the first, but it's been attributed to our publication and to Tiger magazine in Japan at the same time, but we were unaware of that. So we, simple flip book, you flip right and left, and the notion was to try and bring artists who are working in and around the internet to take them away from the kind of profile that they were having in the magazines and in books at the time. I'm sure everyone else can testify to the fact that at the time you would get like the browser window reproduced in a book with a little bar at the top, and then you'd have like a photograph of the artist at the side, and then you'd have a text description of who made the artwork. And it just seemed unfair because obviously all other media were getting full page, you know, full bleed in general magazines, so illustration and whatnot, so photography and all the rest of it. So we thought that obviously the work that was being produced by the artists we were working with deserved similar treatment. It's not automatic, obviously, bringing internet art then to print, but what we started playing with was reinterpretation of the artworks deliberately for print. So the idea that we were somehow co-authoring with the artists. Next question.
Hold on, I'll put this on. So the other publication of yours I wanted to mention is one of the atomic activity ones. It's called Blue Cloud Live Transmission. Does anyone have that? I can hold it up. Yeah, sure. So basically, this is a publication by Dirk Paismans, who is one half of the artistic collective Jody. And essentially, this publication consists of a collection of screen images from a live broadcast which took place on the 26th of May 1991 from Blue Cloud BBS to a local television in the Netherlands. And a BBS, which stands for Bulletin Board System, is a computer system running software that allows users to connect and log into the system using a terminal program. So once logged in, a user can perform functions such as uploading or downloading software and data, reading news and bulletins, and exchanging messages with other users. Set against a background of swirling blue clouds, the cryptic language seems impenetrable. And I thought it was, you know, I'm sure you'd agree that this is almost like an alternative version of the internet, which anticipates.
Oh, it's a proto-internet. It's a proto-internet. I mean, obviously, it's BBS, which means the internet system was still part of it, but it definitely preceded the internet by quite a bit, yeah.
This is actually where I wanted to bring in Shay, because I understand, Shay, in Berlin last weekend at the Composing Rooms, you actually held the book launch of Blue Cloud.
Shay, you're muted, I think.
Hey.
Hey. Hi. I might just you before, if you want to share how the event went. So Shay's a curator and a gallerist. In London, she established the Composing Rooms in 2010, and she co-founded Baron Magazine in 2011, where she's also the art editor. In 2012, she curated the year-long project, The Green Room, which presented John Rathman, Matthew Johnstone, Raphael Rosendahl, Dive King, Honor de Vries, Kate Sensu, Artie Vierkant, and Petra Portrait in her first UK solo exhibitions. In 2014, she opened a showroom in Berlin, an unconventional space for exhibiting art and housing ephemeral art projects. So, yeah, Shay, did you want to share with us how the event went on Saturday and who you had there?
Yeah, so hi everyone. It was great to have that little intro from Karen, thank you, because actually there was a question at the end by Constant Dullard, like how do you connect the internet to publications, and why do you, what's the point kind of thing in printing something that's already existing like on the network.
Oh, I wish I had been there to answer.
Yeah, I'd like tweeted him the Wikipedia link of This Is a Magazine afterwards. I tried to explain, but it was kind of like short. On the panel, I had Derek Parsmans, Joan, the other partner from Jody, was also in the audience. She was sick, so she couldn't join us on the panel. And then Karen Archie, Renee Carmichael, and Nico Princeton. And then I had like kind of my wingman, Sakrowski, who's actually curating the next Transmediale. And he's super wise, like he's been around from the 90s net art scene. And it was really great to have him there, even though I had to like coax him on stage. And Nico and Renee are also practicing artists using the internet, and Renee also does publishing, so there was kind of this connection. I mean, for me, publishing and the internet are like the same thing. Like, I think that now we have the internet.
I mean, publish means finding a public, so yes, you're absolutely right.
And I think that still, when you talk about public or audience, you sometimes, you know, making a book creates a new audience for something that exists online, or vice versa. And I don't. It's like is there a hierarchy? You can't really say. I think they're just different mediums, and you can be experimental. And yeah, I don't know. Is that answering the question? Kind of thing.
Thanks. And I'm just going to pass around the green room booklet now.
Oh, okay, cool.
Did you want to explain a bit about that publication and the role it served at the composing rooms? Oh, sorry, at the green room exhibition.
Well, it's kind of oh, maybe you mute your thing because I'm getting feedback.
Sorry.
The green room is like kind of a pseudonym of the composing rooms, and it confused like everyone a million times, and like still get credited as the green room, not the composing rooms. But I guess the composing rooms idealized itself as having like multiple rooms. So now in Berlin I have the showroom, and like I'm launching the online room, which is room.thecomposingrooms.com, and maybe I want to be confusing, I don't know. But the green room was actually kind of stolen off this community arts centre in East London, and it was a green room. So a green room is actually used as like backstage for performance preparation, or like theatre kind of lines reading, this kind of stuff. And so I just used the name that the building was already calling the room, and it was, yeah, so I got funding from the Arts Council, and I was in this community building essentially already, so it was very much about, I knew that I had to be accessible and public and open, and so the green room publication was a way to, yeah, communicate with the people who might otherwise not know or have an access point to these artists. And I did get a very wide audience, so it kind of functioned, because it was distributed mainly from the entranceway of the building, which has like I think 20-something thousand of foot traffic a year, so it was quite a busy space. Yeah.
Thank you. And on that note, I wanted to introduce Amy Clark from London. Amy is an artist, curator, and founder of Banner Repeater, which is a reading room with a public archive of artist publishing and a project space which opens up as an experimental space for others. Banner Repeater is situated on a working train station platform at Hackney Down Station in London. So ideas of publishing, distribution, and dissemination, how performance of language increasingly impacts upon daily life, were shared in Amy's practice as an artist and curator, and also informed the working remit of Banner Repeater. She's recently exhibited, curated, presented works at David Roberts Arts Foundation, the Camden Arts Centre, and had a solo exhibition in Tokyo. And she continues to commission new artists, writers works through the Banner Repeater platform and several publishing imprints, which include Banner Repeater paperbacks, Banner Repeater publishing, and the Unpublished series. She teaches across the UK with a focus on publishing, distribution, and dissemination, and post-digital art production. So what I'm going to be handing around now is some of the issues from the Unpublished series. Amy, did you want to expand on that particular series and why you've created them? And I thought it'd be interesting to actually introduce you sort of beside Shay, because of the nature of the pamphlet and the mass exposure of the pamphlet as well. Your mic is on mute still.
Is it on now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. Well, I'll start with Banner Repeater because it's easier, I guess, to then sort of work into Unpublished. Banner Repeater was started in 2009 with the deliberate sort of idea of placing an archive of artist publishing in a very public space, or a very public access space, with a high incidental footfall. There's about 4,000 people a day who pass through. Obviously they don't all stop, but there is a good footfall into the space. And it was an idea about putting some material which was quite difficult to find and often sort of kept in an archive at the back of an institution or in a cupboard at the Tate, and actually put it on view so that people could literally just stumble into it, which they often do. And out of that we have a sort of various different publishing sort of imprints, and these often get distributed from the library trolley, which is outside on the platform, and we open at 8 AM in the morning until 11, 6 days a week. Over the weekends we open normal gallery hours, but there's a real emphasis on distributing artist material at that time in the morning, and basically the platform is packed full of people commuting who are setting off into the city, and they pick up the material and then they sort of put it down on a train seat, put it down on a bus seat, somebody else picks it up, and so on. So it's our own distribution network, and it kind of works nicely with the idea of the train network and how that was an early form of, an early network of distribution, but in a very material sense. And then you sort of kind of, that actually is quite a good way to then introduce Unpublish, which is deliberately printed on paper. And it, I'll just show you, there we go. It comes out of a conversation between Hans-Ulrich Obrist and Julian Assange when they were talking about this idea of how easy it is to redact material online, and you know, often not in our favour in terms of the public. And the idea of printing on paper meant that there was potentially a much longer shelf life and a better distribution of that material that also had a material quality to it that was handleable, was people could put it into their pockets and so on. And the more recent paperback, which we did with Erica Scorti, also follows in that vein, with the idea of being able to take this material away. And interestingly, paperbacks actually came from obviously printing press kind of developments during industrialisation, but one of the first reasons for it becoming a paperback and not a hardback was that it could be distributed via the rail networks, via what was then a ubiquitous sort of newsagents and booksellers of W.H. Smith's. But Unpublished was sort of focused on Chelsea Manning, then Bradley Manning, his conversations with various people like Zach Anteluke and Adrian Lamo, that with his leaking this material to WikiLeaks, which he felt was extremely important, and we know this story quite well, but there was a serious investment in what he felt was a terrible wrongdoing, and it was fascinating that he, unfortunately, also his personal communications in the lead up to his arrest, as a result of this situation, also became public. So you found yourself being able to read these intimate moments between him and the person he was communicating with, leading up to his arrest, and they were just extraordinary. They were really amazingly written. And there was this strange sort of collapsing of sort of fiction into reality with the use of his language, because a lot of it was very sort of sci-fi kind of. It was extraordinarily rich in terms of how he was describing things, and he even referred to various different sort of science fiction kind of creature, characters, and almost in terms of what a thriller might be like, how it might be written. So it really appealed to me, and the story really caught me. So I basically appropriated it and re-edited it into 3 different chapters, one of which is his conversation with Zach Anteluke, one of which is his conversation with Adrian Lamo, and then a fictional version of him talking to Julian Assange and Slavoj Žižek from his cell once he'd been incarcerated, and really sort of basically sort of I remember there was a Democracy Now! sort of talk between Zizek and Assange, and I found it painful to watch, in that Manning at this point was sort of incarcerated and was kind of if anybody was going to be a hero, he was the real hero of the piece. And there were these two sort of, I don't know, sort of celebrity kind of speakers, sort of, I don't know, gooning it really. It was some extraordinary thing. So anyway, the third chapter is he writes to them both, sort of parodying the same kind of language that he was using, and they basically developed into a series. I sort of realised it had legs basically, and there's been various other people who've been invited to contribute to it. Nina Power did this one, which was a pamphlet about a book about a blog, which was talking about her experience of being asked by Zero Books to write an one-dimensional woman, which was a lot of material taken from her blog Infinite Thought. And I happened to hear her speaking about the experience of writing and how this changed from this very fluid and contributed to blogging activity, and how then this sort of final print and how she felt about it and how difficult it was to have this sort of single item out into the world. And then since then there's been another one, Revolutionising Desire, a reclamation of representation for its effective potential by Arcadia Missa, who were in residence at Banner Repeater for a period in 2013. And we published this first as a sort of almost an introduction, a sort of working text, and then they invited people during their residency to come and contribute to another rewriting or rethinking through the text, and produced a final text at the end of that. Actually, it's not so much a final text, it's still in progress, I should imagine. And then since then there's been, we've worked with Maria Laura Gadini from Orbits.com, who invited Tara Kelton and Prayas Abhinav to do 2 more and publish. I mean, all of them share a kind of interest in what it is to write and how that mediation sort of gives a sense of a subject in sort of development, you know, an evolutionary sort of how that's evolving and how that changes given each different mediation, and many mediations, of course, and they're all printed on paper. They're all printed in a fairly large run of about 1,000, and they're free. And we put them out on the library trolley in the morning, 8 AM, and people pick them up and take them away with them. And it's just an extraordinary sort of, we're just very fortunate to be in a situation which means that this network is available to us. But it was kind of appropriate to where we were to act in this way. There's I should say as well, there's also the Project Space has a running programme of various different exhibitions, either by commission works or group exhibitions, but they all kind of have this drive behind them to do with publishing and distribution and hence dissemination, and how that sort of changes over time and through history. With the most recent one, as I've mentioned, Erica Scorti's The Outage, which is a ghost-written memoir based on her data footprints that she had analysed by various different professionals. Really fantastic. You should get one now. There's, I guess, maybe to end.
There is one in the archives at the back if someone wants to grab it.
Have you got them over there? Oh, I think you want to. Yeah. I have something coming up actually for the first time in 5 years of actually producing a work in the space, which is called Low Animal Spirits. Working with a guy who used to be a vice president of Goldman Sachs and basically used to write the high frequency trading algorithms, and this is a sort of converging, I guess, of many different sort of references, but and interests that are sort of at the thrust of Banner Repeater, which inevitably I share with my practice, slightly separately to that. But it's an algorithm driven by real-time data, and it's scripted as a live on-screen score and audio work with automated readers. And it takes its cue from the oft-mentioned loss of the referent in both language and the economy. So it's a kind of model of high-frequency trading, but it deals in words from global news feeds for virtual profit while speculating on their usage. And it has a Twitter feed at Low Animal Spirits, which then analyses the words that are, and the behaviour that's within the work, and tweets new speculative headlines. But that sort of shares many sort of ideas with the general remit of non-repeater. Again, looking about this distribution and how these sort of the speed and the complexity of these kinds of algorithms affect our daily lives, I guess. But yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks. I wanted to introduce Marion Tubbs from Sydney. Marion is, a recurring theme in Marion's work is how materiality intersects with notions of value, pleasure, and reality. She has exhibited in Melbourne, Sydney, New York, Paris, and Venice. She currently teaches in photography and situated media at the University of Technology in Sydney and is completing a PhD which is focused on how poor materiality gleaned from the street and internet can poetically critique cultural ascriptions of value at the College of Fine Arts at the University of New South Wales. So Marion is part of the Same Collective, which is also consists of Jack Jeweller, Rob Milne, and Eleanor Ivory Weber, all of whom are from Sydney. And the collective came together as saying for what was called the Writing Project, a program which gave funding to 4 teams of artists, writer, designer, curators, with the idea that each team would create a book, a book collaboration, which was a critical arts writing project. So the same team all had different roles, as I understand it. So Marion was the artist, Eleanor was the curator, Rob was the designer, and Jack was the writer. But I think, as I've read, over the 6 months of their collaboration, their roles merged. And the results of their collaboration is this book, Same. And it's available as a print-on-demand publication. And it consists of 300 images which talk to each other. And it's also manifested itself as an installation of sculptural images and gifts by Marion, which are inspired by the book's content. So Marion, I wanted to start off by maybe you could expand on kind of your different roles as collaborators on the publication and how they emerged, or that's what you've about.
Yeah. Well, I think, and actually, Crazy in Love, which Holly was involved with as well, also went along with this writing project, and it started as an exhibition opportunity and a way to make a publication. And with that in mind, it was titled The Writing Project, and it involved the necessity for 4 collaborators. So they had to be a designer, a writer, an artist, and a curator, which were, well, to my mind, from the kind of beginning, somewhat silly in the sense that many people have a kind of fluid way of working, and a lot of artists also do graphic design work or writing to keep afloat anyway. And so in general, the 4 things that were separated into were interested in the beginning to collapse in any case. And then the further flipping, which it's not like we were just completely rebellious and we just wanted to flip everything, but in terms of it being called the Writing Project, we kind of wanted to investigate how purely images could have language. I mean, I guess we all know that with semiotics and coding, any image can be kind of read as a text. Anyway, and so that's that conversation began, and we basically made a Facebook entity, a person that would have no friends whatsoever, and we would all be able to kind of log in as that one person and only publish images. And so with that in mind, we were all also anonymous to each other, and just kind of intuitively read the images that were coming up and would respond with others. As that went along and became an archive, then we ended up making a book from that, made some chapters, but the conversations of those images were kind of carried over pretty diligently. And what we also tried to do with this book was to make it a kind of almost fine art picture book, in the sense that it was it's quite expensive to make, and hence why it's only available print on demand. We only made a finite amount of them, and there was something in trapping some pretty shitty images from the internet that a lot of us spend a very small amount of time with, maybe a couple of seconds, or I don't know if we can even be bothered these days to like send those funny images to friends, but for a period of time we definitely, did that, and to kind of trap them in a kind of fine art book. And even those selections and them talking to each other is in a sense arbitrary, but the act of doing it and making a kind of book about it was kind of less arbitrary. That was a kind of choice. I will let you ask another question, otherwise I'll just keep profiling what we did. Yeah. If you can, if that went.
I thought it was quite interesting in the book with the text sections that you present a text by a particular author and it'd be in English, but then in same English. So just hoping you could expand on that.
Yeah. Oh wait, I can hear myself echoing, but it's fine. So that was basically was along with the images. Every now and then we'd sort of post something that was some sort of specific philosophy about photography that was kind of undeniably resonated in some way. And but what we wanted to do, and also with the way that we arrange these images, where there are like many repeats of images, because then they fall into another conversation. What we wanted to do with and because it all kind of comes from the internet to begin with, what we wanted to do with the text was to push it through a bunch of only really relying on Google Translation to translate like these certain like philosophical texts through translations, like maybe through 6 different ones, and watch what happened to it. And what was kind of interesting was that sometimes you would still arrive at something that had a really convincing or authorial position, even though it made a completely different statement to the original. And so it had a completely new author, which was basically Google Translate. But it said something nonetheless about photography, and potentially something about photography on the internet, which is, of course, what the whole book was. It was just things which were sourced from the internet that we'd sort of put back into a conversation. So, yeah.
Cool, thanks. And I'm going to introduce our final contributors. Thank you for being so patient. I've got Michelle and Sarah here in the space from Whole Space. Maybe I'll introduce the guys, but if you can come over here, because we're discovering that for you on the Google Hangout, it's better when we speak closer to the mic. So Michelle Gordon, Sarah Barrow, and Ross Patnatsman, all based in Melbourne, in collaborative form of Polar. Polar was a project that examined the relationship between the physical and the digital. It served as a platform to showcase the work of contemporary artists operating in the online sphere. The project consisted of 3 parts: the online exhibition space, physical exhibitions and galleries, and a printed publication containing discussion and visual material. And End Paper was the last edition of Polar, and it featured artists that have worked on past Polar projects, as well as artists and arts writers that the curators have discovered along the course of the project. And I thought one of the introductory comments I found particularly telling was, we hope you enjoy turning the pages and you hold on to this publication longer than you keep the tab open on the browser. So on that note, did you want to kind of explain, you know, why you wanted to end with something in paper for this project?
Yeah, I think the idea behind Polar is, and with the last within paper as well, was just to create something that people would keep, that they'll kind of hold on to and look back on as well. Whereas I think we're both really big fans of what as well. We're all really big fans of like Internet Archive and ways that people are, I suppose.
Sorry, they can't hear you.
I suppose like we're both really big fans of when people do archive the internet, but at the same time we are totally into the idea of the internet not being a permanent kind of realm. We are actually about to shut down the Polar website, I think, this week, so it's going to go, which yeah, I think that's really appropriate for the project. But the internet is something that's quite free-flowing and it changes with time, and whereas publications, they're kind of not forever, but they're more something you put in your library and you'll keep for a while, which I like the idea of.
Yeah, I think when we started the project, we were sort of inspired by something that was said by the founder of Wired magazine, which is obviously something about emerging technologies, but it has its print form, that paper is sometimes the best way to deliver high thought content. So whether it's the best way, we're not here to judge that, but
that's probably a more permanent way, I suppose.
Yeah.
Like it's not,
and it did also, I suppose it illustrated that there are inherent advantages. So, yeah, it is a bit of an archive. It's
I think
also, sorry, a good way to digest, I guess, longer text and discussion, which we got to do in End Paper.
Yeah.
And also, sort of it reveals the sensuality of prints, which for some of our artists, they work sort of across digital and print forms, so they're designed to be viewed both ways. So Michael Staniak was an early example of that.
Yeah, because I think originally we wanted to only have, like we were just like, no, we're just going to use artists, like digital artists, and that's what we're going to do. And then like we can't like, Michael Staniak's work just keeps on like popping up, and we've known him and his work for a long time, and we just like, no, we need to open this up to all forms, all forms of art who use the internet as an influence, or and I think that was a very important aspect of the project. Also, I think platforms was I think that it was an experiment for us. Is like we're kind of new, like, you know, curators, and we really wanted to explore different platforms and appropriate display of works on platforms. So how would you, like, we wanted to explore how to exhibit works on a wall, in a computer, and also, publications.
And some of the artists just lent themselves to that quite well, because when we came up with the name Polar, that was sort of talking about these two oppositional, I suppose, forces, the print and the online.
And also like how I think people see it as these two oppositional forces, but they're not at all. Like they're completely interrelated, and like we live now in like we would always call like the grey area, or like we always kind of look at the world with one eye on the computer screen and one eye like outside the window. Like that's just how life is now. And I think it was a bit of a, yeah, that was a huge thing about the project, was that we live in this really weird world now. And I think it was kind of us kind of come to terms with it a little bit. Maybe it's a bit naive about, I don't know, like a, yeah.
I think on that note, I'd love to really open it up to the audience here. If anyone has questions or comments, and I might relay it to the people on Google Hangout if you're far away and you don't want to come up to the screen.
Maybe if I speak with that. Just on the kind of the website, you said you're taking it down. So do you kind of see it as getting the internet before the internet gets you, like taking it out, taking it down in its hand?
Our domain registration is off.
Yeah.
That makes sense, actually. Yeah.
We discussed this at the start.
We only wanted it to be a joint project originally. It so happened that it went for longer because I'm kind of unscheduled, I suppose. Like, especially the last publication, it took about a year to do. And so, yeah, we just wanted it to be kind of a moment in time. And I think that's what we want the publication to be as well. It's just like a moment in time that's happened now. And then to leave it. That's, I think it's a big thing in my own research practice is that so maybe can kind of keep the background, like where you both start with design. And it's a thing when you start something, you do it, and then you shut it down and start. Just get rid of it. I'm a big fan of that.
Questions or anything positive? Or does anyone online want to share any more thoughts or ask anyone questions?
I just wanted to say congratulations, Alana. You did a fantastic thing.
Thanks, we got there in the end.
Seriously, it's great.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
If I can be so bold as to ask another question. With the actual archive as it is, have you insured that in some way? And how do you go about justifying costs or deciding costs in some way with somebody like that?
No insurance. It's pretty grassroots. Very it's definitely a work in progress. So it doesn't necessarily mean that in the future I have to think about how I'm really going to try and extend the permanence of the books in it. But I'm just kind of taking it as it goes, and at the moment just trying to build it. But I mean, I guess I'm not super interested in how durable everything is. It's not just about preservation, it's also about access for me. So it's really important that when people come to the exhibition space, they can touch the books or the publications, they can feel them and really experience them like they're supposed to, and not necessarily see them as art objects and see that as an art work. It's more just like a project that I'd like people to be able to have access to. And I think, as many of you guys know, like I was in London for a few years, and I found that a lot of the books there were actually much more accessible in Europe. And when I came back here, a lot of them weren't here, so I really wanted to bring them here and have local audiences be able to see what they're like in the context of each other as well. Will I put the publications online, Alana, i.e. scan, upload? I've been thinking about creating different iterations of the archive for an online audience. Like, for example, creating, like I've made all the thumbnail images of the covers, and one of the things I actually did, I mean, the online aspect at the moment is the Google Doc, where I update the inventory whenever I get a new book. And I actually decided to order that according to publication date. So I'm hoping that it kind of tells a bit of a story from, not that there's necessarily a start because it's ongoing or an end, but kind of allow people to learn about each publication within the context of each other publication in the archive. So this is just like, so this is a printout of a Google Doc that I work on as well, and whenever I get a new book, I'm hoping to update that as well. So I just want to flick through it, and everyone who's contributed to the archive, they've kind of given me summaries as well of the book, and it just includes very basic kind of inventory information that you have in the catalogue. So I guess if I was going to realise it in any other way online, it would be to represent that that chronological timeline of the books. I think that's what I'd probably explore if I did it in an online version. Yeah. Cool. Mm-hmm.
Do you feel a certain pressure now that you have this archive? Do you feel responsible for it in some way? You wake up in a cold sweat thinking about where they are?
Oh, sometimes I'm worried that someone will take a book. But I think that's the nature of it as well. And there's that one of the books, actually, it's an Arcadian publication. When I bought it, it's the one in stocking. When I bought it, it wasn't available online, but since I bought it, it's sold out, and they've now made it available online. So the question for me is, do I get rid of it? Should it no longer be part of the archive? And I've left it in there and just included a comment in the inventory to say that now available online. Yeah, I'm just kind of playing it by ear, I guess. Yeah. Anyone else want to? Ask any questions? No?
I just wanted to mention, like in that video, the archive, the web archive one. They were talking about how maybe in the digital era it's more accessible to get to like kind of have an archive if anyone else can copy it, or if it is networked and distributed. So I mean, I would see it as a bit of a shame if you excluded something from the archive just because it was online even, or like maybe there could be a mirror site, you know, or something, or like maybe it could expand to incorporate also publications online, because there is no like really collection of them still. Like there's, yeah, I just wonder what you think about that maybe.
Yeah, one of the books that I considered putting in was the Post-Internet blog by G. McHugh. But that's downloadable as a PDF, so I've opted against that so far. But you know, I kind of agree with you. It does feel like a bit of a hole, in a sense, not to include that particular book in this archive. But you know, at the same time, it's kind of more accessible, I guess, in a sense, because you can read it online. So, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's very much like a personal thing. I think originally I toyed and I spoke to Ryan about this, and we thought about having it as an open archive where anyone can contribute books. But then it becomes difficult to kind of monitor in a way. And yeah. It doesn't. I mean, so far it's only a few boxes full, but it's definitely another approach. You know. Yeah. No, I haven't. A lot of them are very small print runs as well. Some of them aren't. Some of them are done by well, they're the more kind of theory-based texts, but a lot of the kind of artist publications, with different ones of 500 or less. So I think that's also why it's become hard for people to copy them as well. Some of them have been quite difficult to find, like Kutchinovitska's Post-Internet Survival Guide, which is pretty much sold out. And I had a friend in Berlin who went to an art bookshop and actually saw it on a shelf, and nobody had noticed it was there because it's got a plain white spine. So I got that copy, and there was actually one copy at PAM in Melbourne as well, so I got that copy as a backup as well. But other than that book, I don't really have backup, so it is a bit risky.
Yeah. How would you feel about any of these publications migrating online? Like, would that sort of ruin the idea of the archive for you, or are you quite happy with that the nature of it?
I don't think so, because part of the point is for it to be experienced physically. So, yeah, to some extent, it's kind of that experience of seeing them side by side that you don't get online as well. In terms of the sizes and the materials and the weight, you kind of miss out on that. Yeah.
And Karen also asked a really interesting question.
Karen Ann, sorry, I'll repeat that. I'll address your question, but I just wanted to ask you about this is a compendium. This is a compendium because there's so many different aspects to it. Like all the stickers and bits that come in a bag. Like I think that's a good example of one you wouldn't be able to kind of replicate online, either visually, but also like the experience of it.
But at the same time, the experience, one of the experiences already occurred online, because the book does follow a cycle that it's online publications first, then a series of them come together, and that's why we call it compendium. So, the first one was issues 1 to 4, and then 5 to 7, and so on. So it went through a cycle, like an online version, before it comes out in publication, if that makes sense. But for example, I wanted to show one that you don't have there. It's Angela Pless's work, and it's called, the online version is Wrong Human, and we printed it here with, it's a very big book. It was a very unsuccessful book. Sorry, Indigo is singing at the moment. So this book here is Everything Will Be Okay, which is, which is this one. Okay, and this is compendium number 4. And on the inside, I have Angela Pless's work here, Wrong Human. And the sorry, just a second. And the online version obviously was snot coming out of the head as a flashing. No, that's right. And here we have the strands, and obviously the more that you fold the book, the more the strands will become bent, possibly follow the pattern of the algorithmic work. So what we try and do is re-show the work. So the works have already had an experience online, and then you have a further kinetic or material experience once you obtain them in the book. Does that make sense? You're muted, Emma.
And Shay, you've asked Amy, are you also distributing your publications online? Amy, did you want to follow up on that? You're on mute.
I'm unmuted, great. No, the unpublished versions, no, we don't, because that's kind of the point of them, in that it's utilising paper for its best possible, reason. In that that's how it exists, that's how it gets passed around, that's its network of distribution, is through material distribution, and that kind of works in terms of this relationship we have with the railway network and so on. Interestingly, though, there's this recent work, Low Animal Spirits, is a text work essentially, and it's live. So it sort of it's algorithmically sort of speculating using the data that it extracts live, and it's an interesting problem in terms of how does this then become represented offline? What's appropriate? And it's really interesting in terms of sort of going back to people like Flux. Everybody was involved with Fluxus and Aspen, all the mail art kind of people, who were all sort of trying to work out ways. I mean, often for all sorts of reasons, in fact, that we still revisit often, in terms of immateriality and in terms of avoiding, supposed commodification and so on, and all those kinds of ideas, which are very sort of 70s kind of idealistic sort of ideas about, invested in those ideas. We're actually going to do these are printed primarily on Financial Times newspaper, which was pertinent to what I was thinking at the time. And this more recent work, Low Animal Spirits, because it's dealing with high frequency trading algorithms, it's kind of come around again. So we're going to actually print something on, again, Financial Times newspaper by the people who print the Financial Times, which is not going to be, there's going to be some visual representation of the works, but they are sort of random screen grabs. But then there's an experimental text which I was commissioned to do a while ago, that's part of another person's project, Scott Mason, that we're also going to print in tandem with the speculative artwork. And it's kind of looking at language, and it's looking about how this experimentation, and I guess sort of focusing on different ways that we engage with different technologies. So the Financial Times newspaper would be a very different kind of gain distribution network, but it will be talking of, through this experimental text, the conditions. They're all appropriated texts. It's a huge amalgamation of the densely packed appropriated text, and the footnotes are almost as long as the actual piece of work itself. So it's really interesting in terms of copyright and crediting people, which we also had an interesting problem with the outage with Erica Scorti, who was writing online, quoting all sorts of people in her blog, and then of course the ghostwriter then had a look at her blog and used this data to then write her fictional memoir, The Outage. And as a consequence, we had this really interesting problem of how do you credit the people whose these quotes are from, which again ended up in this in a way of being sort of trying to be fair, but also sort of just dealing with the problem, not doing it, which I think is really kind of not, you've got to do it. This is kind of how we write now, it's all chunks of other people's stuff. It's a collective outcome. It's almost, it reminds me of this pre-printing press kind of idea when monks used to copy. And this was their purpose. They weren't authors, they were just copying. And they were like a sort of service industry, if you like. And they'd just copy, nobody would sign anything. And it was about the act of copying, it was about the act of reinscribing these words that were of importance and passing this information on to others. And then slowly but surely through the printing press and through ideas of intellectual property, monetization, and essentially the capitalist thrust through industrialization, copyright and authorship came into being. So it's kind of interesting when you start to look back on the history and how it's collapsed really by our sort of online, the way in which we act online, the way in which we just sort of appropriate, ad infinitum. And how many times have you forgotten where you got that particular quote from or that image from, and had to do this extraordinary search, going back on all sorts of different sort of web browsers, trying to work out where you got it from. I just think the complexity of that speaks more now of I guess, again, going back to this idea of this evolving subjectivity, it talks about more of us in terms of how authorship is related to that, and then the market conditions that contribute to how that's formalised in a sense of contract and copyright laws. And that's a fast changing sort of situation at the moment. It's extremely interesting. In fact, Alana and I first met when we were talking about appropriation beyond the object, and also Ben, when everybody was asked to be a sort of selector on this open call out, which was about appropriating sort of systems of distribution and means of production and so on, but very much appropriation beyond the idea of an object in terms of other people's writing, images, structures, and formats. But I'm going to stop now because I feel like I'm going
on. Yeah, I think you raised many interesting points, but I guess what's reminded me of what you mentioned about the origins of copyright is exactly correct, that copyright came about because of the invention of the printing press, so they very much come hand in hand. And in terms of the appropriation beyond the object, again, I think what I found interesting from a legal perspective was that you can't copyright a style. You can only, or an idea. You can only copyright the expression of an idea or how it's expressed. So this idea of appropriation beyond the object kind of goes, it sort of avoids the complexities of copyright in a way. But at the same time, it still kind of addresses these notions of appropriation, and I guess I think it's definitely interesting to think about the relationship between appropriation and copyright, and if they necessarily rely on each other, and sort of how they relate to each other.
Well, it's like the idea that you can't copy.
Sorry, did you want to say that again because it cut out?
I was just mentioning that there's a really interesting text by Stephen Kinsella about intellectual copyrights, and he makes the case for how you can't copyright an idea. And as you're saying, it's about the expression of the idea. And I seem to remember as well in that Richard Prince piece that you introduced us to, the text that came along with that, there was this really interesting outcome in terms of the judges making a sort of qualifying how much transformation had taken place to deem whether or not it was a new artwork or not. And they all decided that there had been sufficient transformation in this process to deem it a new artwork. So Richard Prince was allowed to keep his intellectual property as such, which was the appropriation of this Cariou guy whose work had been completely appropriated. But it was an interesting point that the judges were making about this idea of how do you determine the creative act and the amount of transformation. It was quantifiable in their eyes. And there was
Sorry,
one
Amy,
judge,
you're cutting out again.
Sorry, I remember there was one judge at the end who wrote a little sort of footnote to this whole debacle, just saying that he didn't feel like he was qualified to make this kind of assessment, on how much transformation had taken place. I just thought that was extraordinarily interesting. And in relation to what we sort of would have traditionally have thought of as a creative process, but not necessarily one that has any reflection on how we act today in terms of this accumulative production. So completely out of step actually with what was actually happening, you know, in the real world. I can't.
Thanks, Shay, you've mentioned you have to go, and I think we're actually going to finish up here, I think, unless anyone's got any final questions they want to ask or comment or anything.
I just wanted to say one thing. I'm sorry. In reference to the archive and the kind of rarefication of these kind of objects that are not necessarily ever going to appear online as digital objects. I think there's this like weird assumption, because like we always have access to the information online, that it's always going to be there, but and some people kind of bandy around this idea of like the Library of Alexandria and like a digital dark age, but I think that's a real possibility, and I think that one thing that would be like a really worthy contribution to the archive, or for an archive to exist like this, is just printed matter of like, and I think the V&A are working towards this at the moment with their like what I think it's called the Rapid Collection Unit, where they like collect objects that like the 3D printed gun, and then they like collect all the information around it and they print it out. And I think that that's something worth considering, because there doesn't currently exist any file format that can withstand 100 years of lack of preservation and care.
Yeah.
That's it. Just a thought.
Can I add to that? I think it's a sort of, you know, I think what you sort of forget as well is something like a paperback is an extraordinarily well designed thing in itself. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. It's kind of so well designed, it's ridiculous. It's kind of the peak of design, if you like, in terms of what you can have in that, and put it in your pocket and take it away with you. It's just, you know, it's amazing, really. But it just seems to me that there's sort of there's appropriate uses for different, you know, kinds of technologies. So something may well be more appropriate online and should stay there. But then the idea of the death of paper, you know, this has been spoken about for 2 centuries. You know, it's yet to happen, and there's a reason for that, in that this is actually really, really useful.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be working on this project, I guess. So on that note, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming, and especially to our contributors as well. So Amy, Ben, Shay, Karen Ann, Marion, and Holly, and Michelle and Sarah, thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me.